Hello grade schools. Today I want to do the third video for Who is to Blame for the Cold War, and we're going to talk about what happened to Eastern Europe. So go ahead and get a paper and pen and take some notes down. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, I wanted to show you just this map of the USSR gaining control of Eastern Europe. And so basically we've got Stalin in here reaching for all of this area of Eastern Europe. He's already got the Soviet bloc, which I'll show you more about. And we've got a couple countries here that are in question what's going to happen with them. So you don't need to write anything down here, so I'll just go on to the next page. Or actually, I'm sorry, you need to write the title down, and then I'll go on to the next page. Okay, so here's a picture of what it looks like. I want to show you the landmass and how big it is. All of this area here is called Russia. It's very huge. Here's Moscow, the capital. So you can see that right here. There's Russia. Then we've got a lot of stands. This is the Baltic states. So when they talk about the Baltic states, right here it says the Baltic states were annexed by the USSR. That's these areas. This is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkestan, a whole bunch of things. Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Moldova, Ukraine. So all of these countries were part of the USSR. So if you look here, this is all the USSR here. Okay, and so then we've got Eastern Europe is right here on the edge. Here we've got the Black Sea. You'll see that in our next map. So Stalin wanted to set up a buffer zone to prevent any invasion from the west. So first, if he's got his Russia, then he's got this part that was added to it, and then to that he adds a lot of Eastern Europe. So let's pause here, write these notes down, and we will go on to the next page. Okay, so this map is taken right from your book, or actually this is taken right from your book. I like it because it gives a really good overview, and I've gone ahead and highlighted what basically happened and how each of these countries became communist. But basically what was going on, if you remember from the previous video, I talked about how Stalin had his Red Army in Eastern Europe, and so therefore they didn't fight so much. So here's Germany right here, and while the war was going on here, when it was time for, in Italy, so obviously Italy was another area that was being fought at. When it was time for the troops to go back to the Soviet Union, they just withdrew and basically kind of just stayed here. And so like I say, I've highlighted basically what happened, so I'm going to go around and let you know. So Eastern Germany, as you all know, the Allies had just given that to the USSR under the Yalta and Potsdam. In Poland, okay, I'm sorry, let me not go around everyone. Basically what's happening is everyone is slowly, the Communist Party is taking hold. And how are they taking hold is depending on the country. A lot of them were the previous people where they're executed, exiled, or put in prison. So exile means you are sent out of the country and you are no longer to live there anymore. That's exiled. Executed, of course, is killed. Imprisoned is put in prison. Okay, so in Poland, they had the Communist Party to begin with, and what happened is they became the dominant party in the government, and all of the other non-communist party were exiled, so they were kicked out. Then if I move on to Hungary, right here, again, the Communist Party became the largest in elections, and anyone else was put in prison, and they also attacked the church. In Romania, the communist, there was an election of the king, or excuse me, of the person in charge, and then they elected a communist prime minister, and then after that they kicked out the monarchy. So then we have in Bulgaria, the same thing, except everyone was executed. Greece, we'll talk about that more later. But in Albania, the communists gained power immediately after the war. And so the Communist Party is what helped allow them to win during the war. Then in Yugoslavia, Tito came over, and we'll talk more about Tito later. He actually he became communist in his own right. He had his own communist party, and they weren't actually controlled by the Soviet Union, and we'll talk more about that later. Czechoslovakia, they won elections, and then they banned all other parties. So the notes that you need to take down are from here. So the USSR annexed a lot of Poland, but by 1947 it was totally in the communist hands. Hungary in 1947, they had rigged elections, and there was result in the Communist Party. And this is what I was telling you about. The Romanian king was forced to appoint a communist prime minister, and then they kicked him out. They kicked the king out. In Bulgaria, the communists won rigged elections, and it was early in 1945. And in Czechoslovakia, a coalition government took power after the war. Gradually, the communists undermined the government and eventually took full control. Taking full control, not talking. So go ahead and write these notes down here. I have these notes in the order that's here, so you can go ahead and add some of this highlighted information if you'd like. So take your time. This is often a 4-point question. How did Russia take control over Eastern Europe? Okay, so pause here. Go ahead and take these notes down. We'll definitely be going over this in class. So if you have any questions, let me know. So how did the USA react to the Soviets' expansion? Well, the USA saw it as an attempt to spread communism around the world, which rightly so, that's actually what Stalin does. But first, the Western powers believed it was possible that they could be friendly and they didn't actually have to have any problems. Here I've got this political cartoon of the red propaganda. Red is always a communist symbol, so if anyone talks about red in terms of political parties, it's communism. So we've got Stalin pulling red over that side of the world. Go ahead and pause this video and take this down, and we'll see what happens next. So then we've got this long telegram. This man named George Kian was a diplomat. He was an ambassador in the embassy in Moscow. And on the 22nd of February 1946, exactly 1 year after Yalta, he wrote a telegram saying that the Russian had a sense of insecurity and that they wanted to spread communism all around the world, and he outlined an idea that they should contain communism and stop the spread of communists. Now, basically a telegram, that's when you use Morse code and the lines and the dots, and usually when people have telegrams they're very, very short. So this was very profound, that this was a long telegram. I've read somewhere that it's around 800 words, so that is absolutely very, very long. And it's also important because we talk about the long telegram often, and how did the long telegram cause the Cold War, or the idea of the Cold War, and this started the whole idea of containment, and you'll learn a lot more about the containment policy later. Now I don't have any typed notes, but I do want you to please write these notes down here and make sure you have the date is when it's done. Okay, so pause here and write those down, and I'll go to the next slide. Okay, another thing that caused problems was something called the Iron Curtain speech. And as you remember, Churchill was no longer the Prime Minister in Britain. He was replaced by Attlee. But he still had a lot of powerful figures. All former presidents and former prime ministers have a lot of power, and they go around and do speeches. And he went to the United States and he did a speech. And part of it, he said, an iron curtain has descended upon us. And so the Iron Curtain is splitting the East and the West, and basically is a curtain of ideologies. It's not an actual curtain, but it spreads the ideology between the East and the West, and it's one of the first mentions that there was actually a problem, a division between the two, and that there might be some problems. So it says no admittance by order of Joe, and this will be Stalin right here. So here's Churchill peeking under the curtain to see what's going on. You notice everything's basically stopped. Now here's a political cartoon from Russia, and it shows Churchill dancing kind of like a cowboy, and his shadow is here is Hitler and one of Hitler's foreign ministers. So they're showing that Churchill is not a very good person, and he's bringing about destruction. So between the Iron Curtain and the telegram and the long telegram, it really sets up this idea that there is a division, that there's something that needs to be done, and it really highlights a lot of problems. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Pause here and copy this down. Okay, so by 1948, we only have Greece and Czechoslovakia that are in Eastern Europe that were not communists. Okay, and the Americans were worried that France and Italy would become communist too. So right here, Czechoslovakia actually fell to communism, as we said earlier. They won the elections, and then finally by 1948 they had banned all other parties, and then Czechoslovakia was a communist one-party state. And remember, I said earlier that communism, there is just one party, one political party, and it's communism. They did have elections, but it was communist versus communist. So we have Czechoslovakia that fell, and that's going to be very important also in our next slide, so keep that in mind. And then Greece, what happens in Greece, there is basically a fight between two groups, the monarchists who want the king, and the communists, of course, want to be a communist. And Churchill is helping the monarchists, of course, and then the USSR is protesting, saying things are not going well. The United Nations didn't do anything. There's a civil war that starts. And finally, Britain could not afford a war. He withdrew, but Truman paid for British troops to stay. And then finally in 1950, the Royalists were in control. Now also, please remember back to the information about Potsdam, or Yalta and Potsdam. And one of the things that was discussed is that they wouldn't fight, the USA would not fight Poland if they gave them Greece. So this is kind of not surprising that the United States really wanted to keep Greece as a non-communist country, since they had discussed that already. So here we've got another little political cartoon, an American cartoon commenting on Stalin's takeover of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union is represented as a bear often, and this bear is basically salivating and trying to take over all of the world. Okay, if you have any questions, go ahead and pause here, or actually the video's over, so you can stop it and take these notes down. And like I say, keep all of these facts in mind, because one thing leads to another, leads to another, and leads to another. So really think about the fact that the USSR came in, took control of everything of the Eastern Europe and all of the things in setting up the Cold War. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks. Bye.